deal with and think about what are some of our concrete options in thinking about this. And I know you're going to hit some of the things we've heard. You could fly by those and pay attention to the other
a
things
couple
as
things
needed.
that'll repeat that I'll go through quickly. Hi, I'm Paul Spiegel. I'm a member of Westtown Monthly Meeting. My kids went to the Westtown School, and I've been involved in the energy field actually since shortly after becoming a Quaker. My kids went to the school. I started going to Quaker meeting, went to some classes they had, and just connected with it immediately, and started to reflect on my life and what I was doing and what I could do to make an impact. And I quit my job and started this company. We've been in business for 13 years now. I've actually been fairly successful in helping people reduce their impact on the environment, reduce their energy use. So let's see how this works. That's not how I wanted it to work. Is there a, maybe this keyboard is connected. It is. So just to, I put this up because people actually do hire us. We are the primary energy consultant for the city of Philadelphia. They have 690 buildings. They spend $40 million a year on energy, and I don't know the total number of pounds of CO2 that emits into the atmosphere, but we have an opportunity to have some great impact here in the city with a lot of things we do. But we work with mostly schools and municipalities, but also some big businesses here and there as well, and small businesses. Now, I actually had to do a little research for this program today, because my focus usually is not on resilience and mitigation. It's more on just reducing your impacts and doing what you can to prevent having an environmental impact and having an impact on a negative impact on climate change. But I did go to a seminar in Washington, D.C. about 3 years ago, and it was run by the Pew Charitable Trust Clean Energy Group, and they had a couple of senators come in. They had some people, someone from the Pentagon come in and talk about what they were looking at it as the risks of climate change. The military was actually one of the most progressive organizations as far as changes they were making in their operations because of climate change. They had one of the speakers talked about a military base that they had in the Midwest that got hit by tornadoes, and they lost power at the facility for 3 weeks. And they're talking about, okay, our focus is on defending this nation, and just the weather is causing us to shut down completely for 3 weeks. So they started a program of installing solar arrays and battery storage and local generation of energy, so that they didn't have to rely on a large grid to be able to supply it to them. So to me, it was kind of an eye-opener and something I started thinking about and talking about a little bit at that time. So I like to put definitions up. I actually looked it up in the dictionary. So resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, but it's also toughness, which means maybe resisting some of the impacts of those difficulties that arise. And I like, so you think about recovering, but also resisting the damage. And then the word mitigation is sometimes, I've seen it used interchangeably with resilience, but it's a little bit different. It's trying to reduce the severity, the seriousness, the painfulness of something. It might be trying to reduce your impacts up front, but it also may be, if this does happen, how can I minimize the effect it has on me, my family, my community? So reduce the severity of the impacts. So I apologize if this is like really basic to you, but I needed it for me, I think, just to get an understanding of it. I think mitigation implies some flexibility, that there's, maybe you have a few different ways that you can get back to normal again. So I think that's an important thing to think about as you start making plans. And how do you protect yourself from those negative impacts that come up with climate change, or even any other type of natural disaster or man-made disaster that can happen. So prevention is a part of mitigation as well. So energy resilience. My focus is typically on energy because that's what I do all day at work, but I also think about it at home. I think about it even when you know, I really appreciate your information about Honduras and some of the droughts that they're facing there and this refugee crisis that we have. And we're closing our doors to foreign refugees coming in that are actually just trying to survive at this point. Are we going to do the same thing if we have those movements of citizens here within our country as well? Are we, you know, to me, I'm stunned and embarrassed at our lack of compassion for people who are facing impacts of these kind of natural disasters and or war that's breaking out, you know, Syrian refugees. So, but I'm going to try to focus on the energy part of this today. See how well I can do that. So energy resilience is trying to be ready for any kind of short-term or long-term power outage that would come from the grid. And there are a lot of different things that can cause this. Our electric grid right now is in terrible shape and really susceptible even to minor storms that we face, and any kind of larger storm really has an impact on the distribution grid for electricity for us. Earthquakes, cyber attacks are happening daily, but the increase in the number of storms and the severity of storms are really going to have an impact on the distribution of energy for us. And those power losses, they occur for everybody in a community when your power goes down. And so there are some key areas that we really need to focus on and think about, like where is it most important? I know we want our energy back in our homes when the power goes out, but you know, emergency responders need to have that energy available to them. We need shelters that have energy where people, because of the food supply, fuel supply, things like that. Traffic signals, trying to drive around when the traffic signals don't work. One really big impact of Hurricane Sandy, and I'm not sure that people talked about it a lot, but sewage treatment plants were offline for weeks. And they were dumping raw sewage, just dumping it into the rivers because they had nothing else to do. They couldn't treat it at all. And that was a huge impact. And the Environmental Protection Agency wrote some new rules because of that. But there's always this resistance to implement some of those things because they're costly. And there's not a guarantee that you're going to ever lose the ability to power those facilities. But schools shutting down for long periods of time could be an issue as well. My son's college had a power outage this past winter, one that lasted 6 days and one that lasted 3 days, and they just shut down classes for those periods of time. They had high winds and blizzard conditions, and it knocked their power supply out. So why is energy resilience important? I kind of touched on it, all those different kinds of things that we lose access to, but really losing energy, it's kind of the foundation of not just our economy, but our society and our way of life, and the things that we do. Pretty much everything requires some form of energy, whether it's electricity or something else. So, how many people have a plan for what you're going to do if you have an extended period where you don't have electricity available in your house? What are you going to do with food that you keep in the refrigerator? What are you going to do for clean water? What are you going to do at nighttime if it's winter? I know this is going back a ways, but we had a period of ice storms, and I lost power in my house for I think 3 or 4 days, and it got to where it was so cold We actually went to a hotel in Wilmington and stayed in the hotel for a couple of nights, but if it had been wider spread outages, the hotel might have not had power. And so, I was a bit of a refugee, but I only had to go 10 miles and go to a Holiday Inn. It's not like the people in Central America, looking for. So my plan, I don't have a plan for my house either, and I was thinking about it, or for my business even. What happens if the power goes out where my business is? And that's where our server is that has our email and all of our files and everything that we do. So I realized as I was preparing for this that I need to prepare a plan. Yes?
I don't know if I should interrupt you.
No,
now,
in fact, please,
this
any
question
questions or
burning.
comments at any time.
I would like to ask, I would like to see some expectation that every home would have some kind of solar, minimal solar thing that would cover, like the freezer.
Yeah, sure.
And your computer.
Like one solar panel and a battery or something like that.
And that would be the norm, that
right.
So that people wouldn't have to go to shelters.
Sure.
Because having everybody mass in the shelter, that is not good either.
Right, absolutely.
Is that something that we could have on the horizon that would be the city's expectation?
I think that's a great idea, and even having that storage of solar energy, and then you get to decide, you now have this limited amount of energy for the nighttime. You have to decide, how am I going to use it? What's most important to me? I first got connected to that idea by some Westtown students that go over to Ghana every year to the Heritage Academy. And they stay in a hut, and they have a solar panel on the hut with a battery that gets charged, and they have to decide at night, what are we going to do? We can run a laptop for a while, or we can run a light for 12 hours, an LED light or something like that, and read and talk. There are different things you can do, but the laptop, it'll only run for a couple of hours. And so they make decisions on this limited amount of energy they have. But it's a great idea to have some kind of backup plan and something you can use just for the bare minimum. I'm going to skip over some of this. So the impacts of not planning for resilience. We tend to wait till something happens and then we prepare for it. And I have some good examples. We couldn't afford to fix the levees in New Orleans because it was going to cost $100 million, and we didn't have that in the budget, and instead it cost $5.5 billion to repair the damage. But they just thought, well, let's just hope we never get a direct hit by a hurricane. Is that really a good plan? Let's just hope that it never happens. New York and New Jersey during Sandy, like I mentioned, that wastewater treatment plants offline, no access to fuel, to clean drinking water, to really basics of survival that weren't available in New Jersey. I mean, you think about that, and it just doesn't really seem that could happen in your neighborhood, but it happened just a few miles away. You had no access to the basic needs for survival. Puerto Rico, it's just still devastated, and we're not really providing the support we would provide if it was Michigan, or some state that had a lot of electoral votes. They might be supporting their recovery, but they lost, I think, 98% of their ability to produce electricity on the island, and they're still not nearly back to where they started. So, it's important to make a plan because you don't know if you're going to be the next place that has to face some kind of disaster. And so, you think about it at homes, everyone should prepare at their home, but why is it important for schools or Quaker meetings to be prepared? And there's a lot of reasons, and I actually had to try to, keep my list down to a minimum. But one of the first things is, let's say a tornado is coming through, you don't want your school buildings to be susceptible to just being blown apart and having people inside the building killed by severe weather events. So having it be an actual safe structure for them to be in is an important thing. And I know a lot of our Quaker schools have a range of buildings, some that are a year old and some that are 120 years old. And do you really know? Are they resilient buildings? Are they safe places for our kids? Yeah.
I think looking at the slides and the disasters that Richard presented and that you're presented with, I think there's something deep down in us, and I don't know why, that we think that these things are all one-offs.
Right.
And so that sort of gives us the license to say, we don't have to prepare for this again. This will never happen again.
Right, sure.
And that's the basis of our thinking.
And you feel like it would never happen to you. It's something that happens in faraway places, and it doesn't really happen in your neighborhood. But it absolutely can. Yeah.
My favorite comment after Sandy was of Mario Cuomo. No, not Mario. Andrew, the governor, who said, you know, we just had a 100-year storm, but they keep happening all the time now.
Yeah, we have multiple 100-year storms almost every year. And I was on the planning commission in my township for 15 years, and we used to get developments that were submitted for review, and they would say, well, that would only happen if we had a 500-year storm. Well, we've had 2 of those in the last 4 years, and we've had 1,800-year storms, so we really need to prepare for those kind of things. You know, you want to have your school back up and running. You want to have your meeting house available to people to go to after some kind of disaster, you know, a severe storm, something like that. And often our houses of worship and our schools are centrally located within a community, and you want to be in a position to support your fellow community members. I don't know who said it, who talked about the fact that they had their power on after Sandy, and neighboring areas did not. And you don't, your first thought is, wow, we were really lucky, but it would be great to change that conversation and say, wow, who can I help and how? And so one way is to have our meeting houses set up as places that people can go to charge their cell phone and get clean water. Maybe if their house was damaged or destroyed, maybe a place to sleep for a while. So they're a great place to use for shelters for short periods of time. And if you can set it up as an emergency service place with your township or municipality, then maybe you get some priority in getting your electricity restored, or you do something like was mentioned before, get some solar panels and backup battery that you can charge. And I have a couple of things I'll talk about with that in a few minutes. So being able to support the local community is just a great thing to be able to do. This slide is a little bit old. It's maybe 2 or 3 years old, so I think it's actually gotten worse, but this is from the Office of Sustainability here in the Mayor's Office of Sustainability in the city of Philadelphia. Just since 2010, snowiest winter on record. We've actually, now we're at like 5 of the 6 warmest summers on record just since 2010. Warmest July, wettest day, wettest month, 2 wettest years. We've had 2 hurricanes and a derecho, which I didn't know what it was, and I looked it up, and now I'm kind of drawing a blank on it, but it's actually an odd, intense rainfall event, and it's not tornadoes, and it's not a hurricane.
Isn't it a straight line?
Yeah,
Wind?
yeah, it's kind of a sheer wind
Without it.
down there.
It's like a really wide tornado.
Oh,
So
we've been
probably-
through one of those.
We had one in our neighborhood.
Yeah, so, and that was just a few years ago. So who's working on resilience. The federal government is actually doing a lot. They have energy labs throughout the country. I'm not sure if they've curtailed any of those operations. As far as I know, they have not. My roommate from college is the assistant chair of the Brookhaven National Lab in Long Island, and he's involved in renewable energy projects, and they're actually installing distributed generation in communities throughout New York State as a pilot to just see how that can help them respond after a severe weather event, and what benefits they get out of it, how to set it up, and who should run it. Should the local utility be the one setting up the distributed generation points? Because their mission is to provide energy for communities and for the population. So should they be putting some resilience into their system to be able to say, well, we can generate energy in local areas and we'll feed it to these key assets that we need, the community center, hospitals, food supplies, something like that. So there are studies being done, and there are pilot projects being done, and the military is going crazy with it. They saw climate change as one of the biggest risks to our security in this country, even though other people in government did not agree with that, but they've been actually doing things because of the security issue. State level. Something I found really interesting was the state of New Jersey, because of Sandy, they've developed something called the Energy Resilience Bank, where you can borrow money at a low interest rate to put in projects that improve resilience of your community or your facility. And it's just a great idea. And again, it's one of those things that comes up after a disaster happens. We're not doing it in Pennsylvania because Sandy didn't have that big an impact on us. And until that happens here, we're not doing anything close to that. So what can we do to prepare here? If I have some things that would be helpful for people to think about, put it all up at once. So the first step to me is let's reduce our impacts to begin with. And so David mentioned the first program. It's Friends Initiative to Reach Sustainability Together. And it was a pilot program to go to Quaker schools to have them look at how they can reduce their impact on the environment. And really the goal was to get them towards zero carbon emissions. So decisions you're making now in your facilities, what can you do that will, in the long term, reduce your carbon emissions, hopefully to zero. And that was really the goal. And so there are different elements to that. Energy conservation is one. Conservation and efficiency are a little different. Conservation is only using energy when you need to, so not, and in fact, I was just going to say we could probably turn off half the lights in this room. We really don't need them all. We have this great natural light coming in. So turning things off when you don't need them. You don't need to run the heat at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night when no one's in the building, but sometimes we do that anyway. Energy efficiency is getting systems in place that use less energy to provide the same output, and I'll talk about that really briefly.
Would it be possible to get a copy of these slides?
Yes.
At least some of these that are specific about what Williams and schools
We
can
can
do.
just send out the good ones. And then, no, but yeah, the whole thing, yeah. You can pick anything from it that you want. It's great. So renewable energy, solar is really the way we're guiding people to go, whether you can do it now or do it in the long term. And you can use it for buildings, electric vehicles, and I'll return to electric vehicles. Well, actually, it's right on this slide. Trying to reduce the footprint to zero. So having a backup plan as part of your resiliency, having a backup generator is one option that you can look at. Solar, one issue with solar right now is that when the grid goes down, your solar array goes down because they don't want the solar array energizing any part of the grid, because when they come in to do the repairs after a power outage, the lineman might get electrocuted from energy fed into the grid. So all solar arrays are set up to disconnect from the grid, actually to shut down anytime there's a power outage, which doesn't seem to make sense. There is a way to get it so that you can have it physically disconnected from the grid, but it's an expensive option to add to your solar array, and so some people kind of skip that step. But I think there are ways to do that, and that way you can use solar even in the event of a power outage. Now, obviously, solar only works during the day, so you would need some form of storage. Backup batteries can be expensive. They're getting better and better, and I think it's actually moving more quickly than people have expected. I think Tesla has been investing millions of dollars into battery technology. But one interesting thing we've talked to some of our clients about is with electric vehicles. You can charge electric vehicles, and whether you can do this in your home or set up to do it at a school that has multiple electric vehicles. You can charge those vehicles during the day, use them during the day, but any remaining power they have, you can discharge that power. You'd have to have it set up to do this, have an electrician set it up, but to actually use that power to power things in your home at night. If you minimize your driving during the day, you've now charged your electric vehicle batteries all day, release them at night. The first time I heard about that idea, it was more to charge the batteries all morning, and then when there are peak energy use days, like hot, humid days during the summer, when the grid is stressed and the generation capacity is maybe not meeting demand, there was this idea that they would pay people to put their electric vehicle fleets, to plug them back into the grid and discharge into the grid, and pay them 20 cents a kilowatt hour or 25 cents a kilowatt hour, because on the hottest days during the summer, the real-time price of electricity is sometimes up over $1 a kilowatt hour. So they felt that this would be an economic benefit as well as an actual benefit to people that invest in these electric vehicles.
I want to ask you, the different energy companies that you can sign up with, do you have any recommendation which are the greenest to the least harmful or the most positive? Is there any way to look that up? Because when I get that, it's really hard to...
Yeah, I buy 100% renewable electricity. The issue that I've run into is that most companies that sell you that, they want to either give you a variable price or they give you a fixed price for a year, and then they automatically renew at a much higher price or a variable price. So I found that I'll have to change suppliers almost every year just to have a reasonable price that I'm paying for 100% solar or 100% wind power. Yeah.
I buy 100% clean energy from Clean Choice Energy, and the same thing happened to me after the first year. They raised it a penny a kilowatt hour, I think, and I just called and started asking questions, and the next thing I knew, the man said, well, the best I can do is 12 cents a kilowatt hour, which was 3 cents lower, and 2 cents lower than I had signed up for originally, and a penny less than PSE&G was charging me.
Right.
So sometimes it pays to not just give up.
Yeah. Right. Where are you from? You from
In New Jersey.
Yeah, because when you say 12 cents a kilowatt hour being cheaper than here, we're paying 7.5 cents a kilowatt hour. So yes. But solar is great in New Jersey because some of our clients there are paying 17 cents a kilowatt hour. We can do solar for 6. So it makes a huge amount of sense there. It becomes an economic and an environmental decision. So I'm going to actually have to race through. I have probably 2 hours worth of slides here that I can talk if I got as deeply into them as I like to sometimes. But really, reducing the energy footprint of your building first is a really great way to start. So getting more efficient lighting, heating and air conditioning, domestic hot water. Those are your main energy uses. So you want to focus on the things that use the most energy. Building envelope, that's both an energy thing as well as a bit of a resilience thing, because your building envelope can fail in the event of a strong, severe storm. So there's some things you can do that improve the insulation, but that also make it tougher in the face of high winds. So to quickly go through this, we've been trying to steer everybody towards what we call electrification, which means get away from oil, propane, natural gas, and go to electricity, because then you can do solar that would generate 100% of your energy use. If you're using natural gas, you can never put enough solar in to offset that natural gas, because you're still burning gas. And so, even though it can be a little more expensive up front, at some point when you get the solar in, you're going to be better off. So for heating, you can get 80% efficient with oil heat. With a natural gas condensing boiler, it's about the best efficiency you can get, 95 to 98%. But an air source heat pump actually, at temperatures down to about 25 degrees, can give you a coefficient of performance of 2, which means for every BTU you put in, you're getting 2 BTUs of heating out of it. And then geothermal, you can get a coefficient of performance of 3 to 4 because the water is slightly preheated after you run it through the ground. Cooling efficiency, that's where heat pumps really just jump off the page. A standard air conditioner, you can get a coefficient of performance up to 2.8. But you get to a water-cooled chiller and you're at 5.5. So for every BTU of cooling you put in, you get, every BTU of electricity you put in, you get 5.5 BTUs of cooling back. And then geothermal with the right heat pump, you can get up to 18 coefficient of performance. So really, really efficient, reduces your energy use and your need. And it can reduce the size of the solar array that you need to power 100% of your building. You know, instead of buying one that's that costs $200,000, you might be able to spend $60,000, something like that, just because you've improved your efficiency coming out of the gate. So this is what we're guiding our clients towards, and we're doing the same thing with the city of Philadelphia. They're really taking a leadership position. I don't know how many of you have heard that they signed a power purchase agreement to purchase 100% of the electricity from a 70 megawatt solar array that's going to be built in Adams County. It's going to cost $100 million to build it, but the city is not paying anything. They're just buying the electricity for 20 years. The 20-year deal is at a fixed price of 4.5 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's dropped their price, and it's going to generate 22% of the electricity that the city uses every year. I love the fact that the person I worked directly for in the Office of Sustainability was the one who developed that whole project and got it approved by the City Council. I got to testify to City Council about 3 months ago, and they voted in favor of it almost right away. It's just great. So we want to make sure that you can generate most of your energy needs with renewable energy. So investing in something, if you invest in a new gas boiler tomorrow, the likelihood that you convert to something that uses electricity in the next 10 years is almost zero, because that boiler is going to last for 15 years, maybe more. So anything you invest in now, you're going to be stuck with for a long time. So you want to make smart decisions now. Yeah.
That's
Oh, you didn't do it.
Crazy question.
Oh, sorry.
I bought a gas boiler about 3 years ago, and I was trying so hard to get one of those heat pumps, and I had several people come in, they said, we can't do it in your house. And I couldn't find anybody who was willing to even discuss how, and they were talking about, it just didn't make sense. And
You have
so we're
radiant
not
heat?
building right for that.
No, we're not. Do you have radiant heat, like
I
a
have hot water
baseboards?
going through
Yeah,
the
hot
Through the
water.
pipe.
baseboards. Yeah, a heat pump, the amount of, the temperature of the water that a heat pump generates is maybe 100 to 110 degrees, where that boiler, you're probably doing 160, 180 degree water. The way you'd have to prepare for that is actually to put in more of the baseboards with bigger fins, and it's something we're actually recommending to the city to do for a project that they're going to go ahead and put a new gas boiler in now, because it's kind of an emergency situation, but they're actually, no, the gas boiler has been in for a number of years. They're replacing all of the radiant infrastructure, all the distribution throughout the building, and we're telling them, your boiler's 7 or 8 years old. When it's time to replace that, you should go to a heat pump. So to prepare for that, as you're replacing all this infrastructure and terminal units that are putting the heat into the rooms, we'll put more linear feet of baseboards in, and we'll put in with bigger fins so that when it's time to replace the boiler, a heat pump at 110 degree water could provide the heating you need in that building. 5 minutes, okay. And I actually, I'm going to be running out of here as soon as I'm done. I'm a musician and I'm playing at a benefit. It's called Flex for Recovery. It's a program for opioid addiction that's being run by the mayor of Westchester and the Center for Families in Chester County. And my business partner happens to be the mayor of Westchester. She asked kindly, could I come in with my band and play at this benefit this afternoon? So I will have to run out of here. So our only option to get to net zero carbon in your facility is using electricity. And this kind of repeats something that you showed, not this part. Crude oil prices. This is for my business clients. I try to show them these slides. Crude oil prices, natural gas prices, completely unpredictable, subject to changes based on, you can see 2005, the spike after Katrina, and then wind power prices had a little uptick a few years ago. They're going back down again. And solar, I think just 10 years ago, a solar installation here in Pennsylvania cost about $8 per watt installed. We just did a project that it was $1.80 per watt installed. So even though there aren't as many incentives available from the state, the price itself has gone down by 70+%. So it is cost effective. Yeah. So here's the summary. I'll get to talk about some of these, but it's a good thing to think about your resilience before a disruption happens and to be prepared for it in advance at home, at school, and your meeting. Reduced energy use has less impact on the climate and the environment. You have to understand that it's tough to get through multiple days in a somewhat normal fashion without access to some form of energy. So I put down window films only because I just got something through email about that. We're recommending window films for the African American Museum here, where the city pays their energy bills. And one of the elements of a window film, it reflects heat back out of the building, and so it reduces your cooling load in the building. And I think there's tinted glass along this window. But the nice thing about window films also is, in the event of a tornado or something like that, if the window shatters, the glass actually still sticks to the film for the most part, and so you don't have flying glass and debris in your classroom or your facility. So just kind of stuck with me a little bit. Put in efficient heating, cooling, lighting systems, look at renewable energy. Paula had mentioned some things about ways to reduce the load on your building, maybe planting trees to provide shade. My house is it's wonderfully shaded, and so it doesn't get very hot. doesn't get much direct sun after about 11 o'clock in the morning. The downside of that is I can't put solar panels on the roof. It's just that they only get about 3 hours of sun a day, even though it's facing a good direction. And the installer said it'll only cost you a couple $1,000s to cut down all these trees. I said, God, I just can't do that. So I'm going to have to find another option for that. But any final questions or comments even about what I spoke about here today? Yeah.
I don't know if you can give me an answer, but going back to what happens in a power outage, if you've installed solar panels,